The 1980s weren't all neon lights and synth-pop dreams. In the shadows of Reagan's America, a darker cinema pulsed. Cheap, violent, unapologetic. These were the films that refused to obey Hollywood's rules, that spat in the face of moral crusaders and dared to go further. Imagine sticky theater floors, cigarette smoke, and reels that stank of rebellion. These are the 13 Grindhouse films that said, "To hell with censors." Number 13. Cannibal Ferox, 1981. When Cannibal Ferox hit screens, it didn't just shock audiences, it declared war on decency. Marketed as the most violent film ever made, it promised to make cannibal Holocaust look tame. The story follows three travelers deep into the Amazon jungle, where they encounter a tribe brutally wronged by white explorers. What unfolds is a savage reversal. The colonizers become the prey. Critics called it a sadistic freak show, and governments across the world agreed. The film was banned in more than 31 countries, with censors labeling it obscene and dangerous. Even in Italy, its own birthplace, authorities seized prints under anti-obscenity laws. In the UK, it landed on the infamous Video Nasties list, its distributors prosecuted for indecency. The director, Umberto Lenzi, defended it as a statement on Western cruelty. But few believed him. Behind the camera, actors reportedly fainted on set, and animal cruelty scenes drew real outrage. The result was a movie that became the embodiment of everything Grindhouse stood for: raw, offensive, and impossible to forget. Decades later, Cannibal Ferox is studied not for its gore, but for how it pushed censorship to its breaking point. In the end, the film's legacy isn't its violence, it's the question it left behind. What happens when shock itself becomes art? Number 12. Pieces, 1982. "You don't have to go to Texas for a chainsaw massacre," screamed the tagline, and Pieces delivered on that promise with gory enthusiasm. Directed by Juan Piquer Simón, this Spanish-American slasher masqueraded as a college-set mystery but quickly spiraled into delirious horror. Someone is dismembering co-eds with surgical precision, and the killer's motive is as twisted as the film's editing. At first, Pieces looked like another cash-grab slasher in the post-Halloween era, but its gleeful disregard for taste and its cartoonishly over-the-top violence made it infamous. The film's most shocking scenes triggered walkouts, and newspapers in Boston and London called it depraved trash. UK censors slapped it with an outright ban, while theaters in Chicago reportedly screened it uncut in midnight-only sessions, drawing both punks and police raids. Behind the scenes, the film's chaos was legendary. Actors were given script pages day by day. Some didn't even know who the killer was until filming wrapped. The gore effects were achieved with actual animal organs, a detail that only amplified the disgust when rumors spread. Critics destroyed it. Audiences turned it into legend. Today, Pieces is beloved by cult horror fans as one of the purest Grindhouse experiences ever made. A film so wrong it became right. Its audacity lies not in its blood, but in its laughter, the kind that bursts out when horror crosses every line imaginable. In a decade obsessed with rules, Pieces was pure cinematic anarchy. Number 11. Ms. 45, 1981. In the neon gutters of early 80s New York, Ms. 45 exploded like a feminist grenade. Directed by Abel Ferrara, it told the story of Thana, a mute seamstress assaulted twice in one day, who transforms into a gun-wielding vigilante. What began as a revenge flick turned into a terrifying meditation on rage, silence, and survival. When it premiered, critics were split between calling it exploitation or empowerment. Feminist groups were outraged at its brutality. Conservative groups wanted it banned outright. In Canada, police raided theaters, seizing prints under public decency laws. Even the MPAA demanded multiple cuts before allowing release in the US, toning down Ferrara's raw vision. But uncut versions leaked into Grindhouse cinemas across Manhattan's 42nd Street, where audiences cheered the blood-soaked retribution. Behind the scenes, Ferrara shot guerrilla style on New York's real streets. No permits, no extras, no second takes. Star Zoe Lund, only 19, wrote sections of the script herself and became a cult icon for her haunting performance. The film was panned by mainstream critics, but adored by the underground. Quentin Tarantino later called it one of the defining revenge films of the 20th century. Ms. 45 wasn't just shocking, it was transformative. It turned exploitation into confrontation, forcing viewers to stare at violence without the comfort of morality. In the end, the film stood as a furious scream, not against censors, but against silence itself. Number 10. The Driller Killer, 1979. Though filmed in the late 70s, The Driller Killer found its true infamy in the 80s, when Britain's video nasties panic turned it into a symbol of moral decay. Directed by Abel Ferrara before his mainstream breakout, the film follows Reno Miller, a struggling New York artist slowly descending into madness, taking out his frustrations on derelicts with a power drill. When it hit VHS, censors lost their minds. Its cover, a screaming face with a drill pressed to its temple, became the poster child for Britain's video crackdown. Politicians waved the tape in Parliament, claiming such degenerate trash threatened civilization. The film was banned for years, and possession could mean criminal charges. In America, rental stores pulled it after parents' protests. Behind the camera, Ferrara had no money, no permits, and no script supervision. He used his own apartment as a set and cast friends as junkies. The result was a film that bled authenticity, grim, dirty, unflinching. Critics called it nihilistic. Artists called it genius. When it finally resurfaced uncut in the late 90s, The Driller Killer was hailed as a masterpiece of urban psychosis. It wasn't just about gore. It was about desperation in a decaying city. Censors thought they were banning violence. What they really silenced was a portrait of America's lost souls. In a world afraid of truth, Ferrara's drill didn't just pierce skulls, it drilled through hypocrisy itself. Number 9. Street Trash, 1987. Few Grindhouse films are as gleefully vile, or as weirdly brilliant, as Street Trash. Directed by James Muro, this independently produced nightmare dared to blend slapstick humor, grotesque violence, and social decay into one unforgettable sludge of chaos. The film's premise: a cheap bottle of booze called Tenebrae Viper turns homeless drinkers into melting piles of Technicolor goo. It's both disgusting and hypnotic, a carnival of corruption playing out in abandoned junkyards and graffiti-splattered ruins of Reagan-era America. Censors had no idea what to do with it. In the UK, distributors were forced to submit multiple cuts. Even then, scenes of dismemberment and body melt horror were considered unacceptable. US critics called it an attack on taste itself. Religious groups labeled it a moral pollutant, urging theaters not to screen it. But behind the madness lay genius. Muro, then just 21, used homemade dolly rigs and inventive prosthetics to achieve groundbreaking practical effects on a shoestring budget. The film became a midnight sensation, drawing crowds who cheered every time someone dissolved into rainbow slime. Decades later, Street Trash remains a bizarre triumph, part social satire, part visual experiment. Its legacy isn't about gore, it's about independence. When studios refused to take risks, Street Trash proved that rebellion could look like trash and still shine like art. It didn't just disgust audiences, it dared them to laugh at the apocalypse. Number 8. Combat Shock, 1984. Combat Shock might be the most disturbing anti-war film you've never seen. Directed by Buddy Giovinazzo, this no-budget shocker follows Frankie, a traumatized Vietnam veteran trapped in poverty, addiction, and madness in the decaying streets of Staten Island. There are no heroes here, only nightmares. When it premiered, it was marketed misleadingly as a Rambo-style action movie. Audiences expecting explosions got despair instead, scenes of malnourished babies, suicide, and hallucinations too brutal for mainstream cinema. Censors were horrified. In several countries, screenings were pulled mid-run, and even American distributors demanded edits. It was accused of being nihilistic filth and psychological torture on film. Behind the chaos, Giovinazzo's story was deeply personal. He shot the film on 16mm with friends and family, using real abandoned buildings as sets. The haunting atmosphere wasn't staged. It was the Bronx in the 80s, crumbling and forgotten. Critics initially dismissed it, but underground audiences embraced it as a raw, fearless vision of post-war trauma. Trauma Entertainment eventually distributed it uncut, giving it cult immortality. Today, Combat Shock is recognized as a precursor to psychological horror, like Jacob's Ladder and Taxi Driver's spiritual cousin. It wasn't banned for gore alone, it was banned because it hurt to watch. In a decade obsessed with glamour, Combat Shock stripped everything away, showing what happens when the American dream rots from the inside out. It's not just Grindhouse, it's a cry from the ruins of forgotten soldiers. Number 7. The Beyond, 1981. When Italian horror master Lucio Fulci unleashed The Beyond, audiences were not ready. Marketed as part of his Gates of Hell trilogy, it began as a haunted house movie and descended into surreal, blood-soaked madness. The story follows Liza, an American woman who inherits a Louisiana hotel built over one of the 7 gateways to hell. Once opened, that gate spews out horror, hallucination, and death itself. Critics initially dismissed it as incoherent nonsense, a fever dream drenched in gore. But Fulci didn't care. He wasn't making sense. He was making nightmares. His signature slow-motion eye gougings, zombie resurrections, and storm of blood finales made The Beyond one of the most banned horror films of the decade. In Britain, censors removed nearly every death scene before allowing its release. In Germany, it was outright banned until the 90s. Behind the chaos, the film's production mirrored its content. Fulci shot on a shoestring, using real decrepit buildings in New Orleans and practical effects so gruesome they looked documentary real. The result was a horror experience that felt cursed, as though the camera itself had opened the gates. Over time, The Beyond rose from censorship ashes. Quentin Tarantino's Rolling Thunder Pictures reissued it uncut in the late 90s, calling it a masterpiece of atmosphere. Today, it's hailed as dream logic horror at its boldest. It wasn't just banned for its violence, it was feared for its vision. Fulci didn't care about ratings or morals, he filmed nightmares that refused to stay buried. In the end, The Beyond wasn't just horror, it was defiance, pure cinematic blasphemy. Number 6. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, 1986. Some films are banned because they're obscene. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer was banned because it felt too real. Directed by John McNaughton, this grim pseudo-documentary follows Henry, a drifter who kills at random with chilling calmness. There's no soundtrack, no moral compass, only cold, methodical death. When it premiered, the MPAA refused to give it an R rating, calling it morally unacceptable. The film sat unreleased for years, circulating only through underground festivals. Critics who saw it were shaken. One reviewer described it as a descent into pure evil without escape. In Australia and the UK, it was banned outright. In the US, major distributors refused to touch it, afraid of lawsuits and protests. Behind the scenes, McNaughton made the film for just over $100,000, shooting in Chicago's decaying industrial zones. Michael Rooker's performance as Henry was so disturbingly authentic that crew members reportedly avoided him off set. There were no big effects. No campy one-liners, just humanity stripped bare, shown in all its horror. It wasn't violence that frightened the censors, it was empathy. Henry forced viewers to experience the world through a killer's eyes, without cinematic distance or relief. When it finally gained a limited release in the early 90s, it was hailed as a masterpiece of psychological horror and preserved in the National Film Registry for its cultural impact. The film's legacy is chilling. Sometimes censorship isn't about protecting morality. It's about protecting us from seeing the monsters that look too much like ourselves. Number 5. Tenebrae, 1982. Dario Argento's Tenebrae might be the classiest film ever banned for being too depraved. Released during the height of the moral panic over violence in film, this Italian giallo masterpiece told the story of an American novelist whose books inspire a series of brutal murders in Rome. It's part slasher, part art film, and entirely scandalous. From its first scene, Tenebrae attacked both censorship and hypocrisy. The killer's victims were often immoral women, echoing the critics who accused horror of corrupting youth. Argento deliberately exaggerated every taboo. Blood sprayed like red paint, blades glistened like art sculptures, and violence became a form of visual poetry. Censors in Britain and Germany didn't see the art. They saw pornography of violence. Tenebrae was pulled from shelves during the Video Nasties crackdown, and police seized home copies as contraband. Italian critics called Argento perverse, and TV networks refused to air trailers. Yet filmmakers around the world, from Brian De Palma to Tarantino, called it genius. Behind the camera, Argento shot using complex camera rigs that glided across buildings and hallways with hypnotic precision. The iconic score by Goblin pulsated like a heartbeat, amplifying the unease. Over time, the film's reputation transformed. What was once banned as filth is now studied in film schools as a masterclass in suspense and visual design. Tenebrae didn't just break censorship rules, it mocked them. By turning violence into beauty, Argento forced audiences to confront their own fascination with what they claimed to condemn. In a world obsessed with morality, Tenebrae dared to ask, who's really guilty? The artist or the audience watching in silence? Number 4. The Evil Dead, 1981. Before it was a global franchise, The Evil Dead was the little film that censors wanted dead. Directed by a 22-year-old Sam Raimi, this ferocious, low-budget horror flick followed a group of friends trapped in a cabin where an ancient book, the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, unleashes demons, possession, and pure cinematic chaos. Shot on 16 mm for less than $400,000, it looked cheap, raw, and unrelenting. Exactly what made it terrifying. When it premiered, audiences fainted, critics recoiled, and governments panicked. The British Board of Film Classification called it a threat to public decency. Police seized tapes from rental stores during the video nasties hysteria, while some local councils banned screenings altogether. Raimi faced the threat of prosecution under obscenity laws, a fate unheard of for a first-time filmmaker. Yet behind the panic lay innovation. Raimi's kinetic, shaky cam shots, created using makeshift rigs and planks of wood, became a signature style copied for decades. Bruce Campbell's slapstick meets terror performance turned him into a cult icon, and Stephen King famously called it the most ferociously original horror film of the year. The Evil Dead didn't just horrify, it inspired. By the late 90s, it was reinstated uncut, hailed as a masterpiece of guerrilla filmmaking. What began as a censored curiosity became one of the most influential horror films ever made, birthing Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, and a new era of horror that gleefully mocked censorship. In the end, Raimi didn't defeat censors with lawyers. He did it with imagination. The Evil Dead proved that when art is too wild to contain, it can't be buried, only reborn. Number 3. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978, banned through the 80s. No film divided audiences like I Spit on Your Grave. Directed by Mir Zarchi, it was made in the late 70s, but gained its true notoriety in the 80s when home video gave it a new and furious life. The story follows Jennifer Hills, a writer brutally attacked who exacts revenge with cold precision. It was marketed as exploitation but delivered something far more unsettling, a mirror held up to violence itself. Censors around the world reacted with outrage. The film was banned in Britain for nearly 2 decades, and Canadian authorities seized every copy entering the country. Feminist groups condemned it as vile, while others defended it as a raw, confrontational protest against cruelty. In the US, the MPAA initially refused to rate it, forcing Zarchi to release it unrated, a death sentence for mainstream distribution. Behind the scenes, Zarchi directed with grim focus, claiming the story was inspired by a real-life assault he once witnessed. Lead actress Camille Keaton delivered a haunting, silent performance that blurred the line between victim and avenger. Critics called it garbage, but underground audiences saw it as something more, a howl of defiance against cinematic hypocrisy. The controversy made it infamous, then immortal. It was studied by academics, remade in the 2010s, and continues to provoke debate about censorship, morality, and who gets to decide what's too much for audiences to handle. In the end, I Spit on Your Grave didn't just say, "to hell with censors." It asked something more dangerous. Why do censors fear empathy more than violence? Number 2. Maniac, 1980. If any film represents the sleazy heartbeat of 1980s Grindhouse, it's Maniac. Directed by William Lustig, it follows Frank Zito, a deranged loner in New York who stalks women through the night, unable to escape the trauma of his abusive childhood. Starring character actor Joe Spinell, the film captured the rot of Times Square before it was cleaned up. Grimy, terrifying, and real. When it premiered, the backlash was instant. The Los Angeles Times called it an abomination. The British Board of Film Classification banned it for unrelenting sadism. Even actress Caroline Munro was horrified by the final cut. Protesters picketed screenings, shouting that it glorified violence against women. Censors demanded over 10 minutes of cuts, but Lustig refused. The uncut film circulated on underground VHS tapes, turning it into contraband gold. Behind the scenes, Spinell poured his soul into Zito, often improvising his psychotic monologues. The film's infamous shotgun scene, created by legendary effects artist Tom Savini, became one of the most realistic kills ever filmed, so convincing that it triggered investigations in some countries. The police raided theaters in Germany, and Australian importers faced obscenity charges. Over time, Maniac gained new meaning. It wasn't just gore. It was a disturbing character study of loneliness, trauma, and obsession. Modern critics now call it the taxi driver of horror. Maniac didn't glamorize evil. It stared straight into its eyes. And in doing so, it became one of the most defiant "to hell with censors" statements ever projected on film. Number 1. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. No film in history tested the limits of censorship or sanity like Cannibal Holocaust. Directed by Ruggero Deodato, this Italian shocker redefined the meaning of banned. It wasn't just censored, it was arrested. The premise alone was explosive. A documentary crew disappears in the Amazon while filming native tribes, and when their footage is found, it reveals a descent into human depravity beyond imagination. Released at the dawn of the 80s, it stunned the world. Some called it a masterpiece. Others demanded it be burned. Its found footage style, decades before the Blair Witch Project, felt terrifyingly real. So real, in fact, that Italian authorities believed Deodato had actually filmed real murders. He was arrested for obscenity and murder, forced to bring the actors to court alive to prove they hadn't been killed on camera. Everywhere it screened, chaos followed. In the UK, it topped the Video Nasties list and was banned for over 20 years. In Australia, it was outlawed under the same classification as snuff films. Even countries like Norway, Iceland, and Singapore declared it unfit for human viewing. Censors cited its brutal realism, while audiences whispered that it was cursed. Behind the scenes, Deodato fought censorship as much as he fought his own conscience. The film's use of real animal deaths enraged activists, but its narrative condemned Western exploitation of indigenous people, turning the civilized into the true monsters. Critics missed that point. The film's horror wasn't the tribe's violence, it was the filmmaker's arrogance, the mirror held to colonial greed. Despite the outrage, Cannibal Holocaust became one of the most influential underground films ever made. Its found footage realism inspired generations of horror directors, from Eli Roth to modern survival thrillers. Its legacy? A paradox. Banned, despised, yet studied in universities as a warning about both censorship and voyeurism. Cannibal Holocaust remains the ultimate example of Grindhouse cinema screaming back at its censors. You wanted realism? Now live with it. Grindhouse cinema wasn't just about gore, it was rebellion carved into celluloid. These films weren't made to comfort. They were made to confront. Each ban, each seizure, each moral panic proved one thing: censorship only fuels legend. So, which of these forbidden films do you dare to watch? Subscribe for more dark cinematic histories before they're banned again.